Hello and welcome. I'm Mashudu Masuta to this medium-term budget policy special for 2017. We know that this is Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba's first medium-term budget policy statement. So we'll discuss how he fared in this first one and how we are likely as a country to fare in the years ahead. And as the country's economic outlook takes a turn for the worse, with GDP contracting by 0.7% in the first quarter of 2017, a stronger economic growth is required to return the public finances to a stable position. This will put South Africa back on a path of rising employment and increasing prosperity. And of course, South Africa's youth as well as entrepreneurs need to be at the center of this. Join me to unpack this is Matsi Modise. She is the Managing Director at Simodisa. Olebogeng Sentsho, she's the Head of Operations at Yeabo Mining, and Vusi Thembekwayo, he's a venture capitalist. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba giving his first budget speech. Well, it's a mini budget. We know that the big one is in February. Maybe let's get your first impressions of what you thought the minister put out today. Matsi, you can go ahead.
Sure. So it is certainly sobering times, tough economic environments. Some are, well, self-inflicted, some are external. But it was comforting to see that the minister had a handle on what is really happening on the status quo. Also appreciate the honesty, the fact that, we're not being efficient with our state-owned entities, lack of implementation. And then also some solutions, some interventions. Currently, South Africa has high challenges. Unemployment is actually at its highest. It's not getting any less. Inequality, poverty, and various other socioeconomic challenges that we have. But it was also comforting to see that in July there was a 14-point plan of interventions, and for small businesses, it's quite encouraging that they actually put a deadline to when this will be happening. And essentially, I suppose there is a bit of a silver lining. But I think generally, given the times that we're experiencing, it was good to see that they have a sense of what is happening and possible solutions.
We'll see. Times are tough. Did the minister do the right things for you or say the right things?
Sure, it's a mixed bag. I think there were some parts where he hit the nail on the head, and then there were other parts where I just felt too soft once again. So, I work with entrepreneurs. We invest in entrepreneurs. So the things politicians talk about, we live in daily reality. This 30-day thing is a joke. Right? Government departments don't pay small business in 30 days. It's enacted in law now, but it's really hard for small businesses to go and say, you're not paying me on time, and this is what you're doing to my cash flows. So there's simple, basic things we've got to get right. I said to you earlier, we've got an oligopolistic structure in this economy. We've got to fix issues about the structure of this economy. Nowhere else in the world you have 56 million citizens being effectively having monetary supply governed by 4 major banks, 5 large food retailers, 6 large clothing retailers. So we either going to continue on this rhetoric of entrepreneurship, and we have for the past 15 years, or we are actually going to do stuff about it. These numbers you're seeing now, this increasing rate in unemployment, 27.7% narrow definition, 40% broad definition, 30% of this country lives on less than 1,000 rand a day. The tax threshold in this country is 5,000, which means you've got the majority of citizens not contributing to the tax system, right? You don't fix that stuff by talking about it. We just need to start doing. This really isn't complex.
We need to start doing. Olebogeng, what did you make of that speech?
Well, definitely to Vusi's point about the fact that we need to start doing. The minister did say that, implementation was key in his speech. But where I think that he failed quite substantially was the fact that he didn't put forth an actual plan. It was more elaboration on plans previously made and more fleshing out things that other people had said before, which I found disappointing. I was looking for some innovation. I didn't find it. I was looking for a proper stance on what's going on with the mining charter. I did not find that. I was looking for some direction regarding what they're going to do with small businesses in this country. The fact that we have this huge this huge number of small businesses that are failing. What are they going to do about that? I didn't get any sense from the minister that small businesses are being supported from the point of startup up to the point where they become successful and can actually contribute positively to industry. So It was a mixed bag, but for the most part, I found it a bit disappointing.
Wouldn't you say that it's too early to say? I mean, the man has only been in his position for a couple of months. He's took over in March. He's still got that budget coming through in February. Shouldn't we then give him some time to see what he's actually trying to do here with the economy, Vusi?
Yeah, I agree. I think you have a valid point, right? So I think we have to remember this is a budget term review. It's not review. It's not reviewing his budget, right? So he's taken over some legacy work. But if you listen to the speech, he opens up sounding quite like the similar tone we've had over the past decade. And then he changes tack very quickly. There's a lot more radical thinking around what needs to happen, mentioning of Postbank getting a license, for instance. So he's clearly moving in the right direction. I suppose the angst we're feeling is the speed at which government is moving and the speed at which the problem is accelerating are not connected. The problem is really getting exacerbated. Just turn on your news, and in this country it's not uncommon to find a service delivery protest that is fully attended all the time. Like if these things were concerts, they'd be fully sold out, right? And people who are in the mainstream economy earning an income, have taxes to pay and an income to earn as well as credit to pay for, don't protest. So when you're watching a service delivery protest, recognize that those are citizens for whom the promise of this country is not realized and recognized. For me, that's the direction we need to be pushing. There's got to be a broader social agenda about what we need to do. But you are dead right. We ought not to be too harsh in our criticism.
Well, talking about small business, Matsi, we know that you work in that field with a small business. I mean, they must feel really frustrated when things don't happen. Like Vusi was saying a little earlier on, it doesn't take 30 days for companies to get paid. It's longer than that. So are you guys having discussions with government to tell them this are the kind of issues we're facing and how we find a solution to all of this?
Correct. So you have to look at on different dynamics or dimensions. So what he did mention, which are two critical things, is access to markets and access to funding. So he spoke about the procurement bill and how they're going to implement that, and that was also reflected in the 14-point plan. And procurement is key. The ability for corporates and for the public sector to open up their value chains to actually, allow small businesses to provide services is very, very important. And it's been it's been highlighted that they're now going to enforce it. Yes, we've been listening to this for years. I mean, it's probably been a rhetoric for the past 5-6 years. However, now they've put deadlines saying that this is going to be enacted. So that's a positive. And the second positive thing that they did mention is around the government complementing funding towards startups. So last year there was a 1.5 billion rand fund that was set up by the CEO initiative. So that's strictly a private sector initiative, injecting capital into into a gap that we know that early stage investing in South Africa is very, very limited.
Sure.
If you're looking for 50,000 rands, 100,000 rands to seed your idea, not a lot of people are going to be able to assist you. They say go to your family, fools or friends, and we know that we don't have a lot of family, fools or friends that actually have that capital. So it's a positive. It's been said that next year in the next budget speech we'll actually hear something about government now putting money and co-investing with the private sector around increasing that capital that will go towards seeding startups. So for me, those are two very positive things. And then you spoke around the work that we do around engaging the government with some of the challenges. So in 2014, we were able to list priority policies that the government has to progress. There's the 7 of those key policies to nurture high impact, high growth, entrepreneurs in South Africa. And 2 of those have been advanced, one of them being IP exchange control. So they were able to remove some of the regulations. We're continuously engaging with the National Treasury and the Reserve Bank around how do you further reduce these regulations so that South Africa is a much more attractive capital destination, and also the exchange of IP is easily done. So that for us is quite a big win. Out of 7 of those policies, 2 of them have been advanced, and the other one, which is relevant to my colleague here, is a Section 12J tax incentive for those people wanting to invest in venture capital companies. So, there has been some positive stances. I would hate to sit here and say it's negative. I have to essentially put things into context relative to the engagements that we have, and they have been quite receptive.
Olebogeng, you in the mining sector, we know the kind of struggles that the mining sector has faced. We're talking about the Mining Charter 3 that's still being gazetted, but there's a bit of a back and forth when it comes to industry and government on that mining charter. Where do you sit? Do you think that this will definitely be resolved? Because there is a lot of talk that if it isn't resolved quickly, more and more investors will stop coming to South Africa, or they will not look at South Africa at all.
The biggest problem that we have with regards to the mining charter is that now it's a deterrent. It deters people from investing in South Africa. Policy uncertainty is the #1 deterrent of investors. And right now we find ourselves in a position where industry and government can't come to an agreement as to how to move forward on this one. Industry has put its foot down, government has put its foot down, and no one wants to back down in either way. The problem with the mining charter is that very little consultation was done. And what the minister failed to do in this particular budget speech was to say, look guys, if you guys can't come to a consensus, this is how much revenue we lose every year. This is how much investment we lose every single year. We're trying to get investors to start investing at the greenfields level. In order for that to happen, we need to have policy certainty. We need to know what percentages will be apportioned to investors at which times. We cannot have a situation in South Africa, especially now, where industry and government are at loggerheads with one another, because all that's going to happen is that investors are just going to leave and there's going to be no sort of resolution to this particular problem. What also troubles me is that the minister doesn't put himself in a position of leadership in this issue. He doesn't say, look, Treasury, obviously he needs to avoid issues of overreach. He doesn't want to be interfering in Minister Mosebenzi's Zwane's job, and he doesn't want to be chatting to the chamber where he doesn't need to be chatting to the chamber. But he needs to put forth that this is a fiscal situation. Mining contributes a large amount of revenue to our GDP, and also a large number of people are employed by the mining sector. And if we lose the mining sector, we lose a humongous portion of our GDP, and we lose a humongous portion of our investors. And I think that in failing to deliver some sort of leadership in that regard, he sort of failed the public, because this charter is going to be a problem into perpetuity if someone doesn't take the initiative and say, look, this is where we need to go with this.
Vusi, I see you nodding. What do you want to reply?
Yeah, look, I need to be, I must be careful, but you know, part of the problem with South Africa is we live in an economy that was designed for us 100 years ago. And in effect, what we've done is we simply forced through the same economic thinking, modeling, and theories that was designed 100 years ago. So with the greatest of respect, mining is a dying industry. It's a dying sector. There are no high growth economies in the world that are hinging economic growth rates on mining. Look at Zimbabwe 20 years ago, and look at Vietnam 20 years ago, and percentage of mining as well as downstream industries into those GDPs. Look at Zimbabwe today and Vietnam today. And it's not hard to see why the Vietnamese economy is growing at over 8%. It's moved higher up the value chain. So whilst you're correct, in terms of protecting the current size of fiscus and contribution to the taxable income of the country, you need the sector. But again, this is about how do we maintain the status quo. It's not about how do you broaden the pie. The conversation has to be about how do you build the pie and broaden the pie. I take the point, right? So you do need to go further downstream. You do need certainly softer funding, which, by the way, just brings me to a separate point that Matsi made. I don't know about you, how you guys feel, but there's a part of me that's frustrated when I see the government, the state, want to be referee and player. So why is government, just a simple question, why is the government raising a fund? Let's just start there. You're the state. You create the instruments along which funding should happen. You create a legislative environment that makes funding possible and easy. You create an incentive for people with capital to invest, and then you allow the environment to play. But the minute you become referee and player, funders now like ourselves are competing in a market where they're effectively distorting the risk rating of beta and transactions, where you want to fund entrepreneurs, and that creates massive follow-through problems into the mainstream economy. So there's a part of me that just feels like I understand the issues, I really do, and I understand that there's angst. But I don't know if you feel the same, but I just feel like we need to take a step back and go, what do we want to do for the next 20, 30 years? Let's do it. Not this sort of stop, start, pitch, pace approach, because it's not going to work.
Yeah. So to speak on to Vusi's point around, government being the player and the referee, my understanding is that it's a co-investment fund.
Sure, it is.
It's a fund of funds whereby they'll allocate proper fund managers to actually allocate those funding. That's my understanding, not government setting up a separate fund amongst all the historical funds that they've had over. So it should have different outputs and outcomes if it's a co-investment fund, whereby they actually collaborate with the CEO initiative. That's my understanding of it. It could be different.
You're 100% correct, but the point still stands. Create the legislative environment. Let me give you an example. Section 12J says you get a tax break of up to 2 million. Let me tell you, there is no high net worth investor who's going to take a meeting for you for 2 million. He's got a 50 million rand problem. Now, fantastic that we've got Section 12J enacted, but you're not going to get a meeting with somebody sitting in Stellenbosch when you say, I'm going to save you 2 million in taxable income. He's got a 50 million rand problem. So what do? If you're going to have this scheme, and this is the point, guys, it's not about whether or not we're not doing stuff. It's about, are we firm in what we do? Like, if we're going to do it, let's do it properly. If we fail, let's fail. If we succeed, let's succeed. But we can't sort of half-hearted things and then kind of get half-hearted approaches. That's just my view.
So, I have a sense that I'm the patient. I have a sense that I'm the patient Polly on the panel, because to your point, Vusi, around Section 12J, at this point in time, we are engaged in the National Treasury and also the Reserve Bank around refining that. So it's equitable. It makes a lot of sense.
Yesterday, comrade.
Yes, today, that's what we're doing. And I think in the future, there will be some refinements. But the fact that as a nation, we've identified key levers of progress and growth in our economy and some policies that will nurture this, it's very, very progressive. And then to talk to your point around, legacy industries such as mining, they're not necessarily dying, but there's great examples globally of countries that are not rich in resources like Singapore, how they've actually used innovation to enable them. And there was a lot of reference in the minister's speech around the World Bank's current SA Economic Outlook report, around how do we actually nurture innovation as a lever of, economic growth. And let's stop looking at traditional legacy industries such as mining, and how do we actually
I need to come in there, because as much as you refer to it as a legacy industry, for me, I see it as the future of young people, because there are no other industries in the immediate short term that we can look to for economic development. We're looking into a tertiary mining industry right now where we actually beneficiate. That's industrialization. That's us taking proper steps into the fourth industrial revolution. And when you beneficiate on our shores and you start exporting and earning dollars for your exports, you are radically transforming the economy. And for me, I think that is pivotal, and that is the role of the mining industry at this point, to be the spark plug of radical economic transformation. But before you jump in and talk about legacy industries again, because I think maybe it's because I'm a person who's in mining. So for me, mining is everything, and mining is all I see, and mining is all I hear. But what's important for us to note is the fact that mining provides us with an opportunity to industrialize. A great deal of where procurement spend in mining goes is to international companies who actually manufacture things. If we could bring that manufacturing to our shores and start being spark plugs of industry right in South Africa, that is how the mining industry actually takes young people forward, and that is how we become the spark plugs of radical economic transformation.
On reviving that manufacturing sector as well.
I agree with everything you've said. I was just in Europe meeting with global partners and investors there. Sweden is a country of just over 20 million people, but it has something like 8 times the size of our GDP. Now, Sweden doesn't have any underlying natural minerals. What they do have is, if you come to our country, all the engineering firms, the beneficiation firms, the industrial firms are effectively Swedish, right? I agree with everything you said, but our firm looked at the data. Let me tell you, the first time a South African president used the word beneficiation in speech was 1995, Nelson Mandela. So we've been talking for 22 years. This is my frustration, is we have to move beyond the rhetoric. And I take the point about pace, slow, but the problems we have are not keeping abreast of the pace we're moving at. This is exactly the fundamental issue we're facing.
Do we have the skills, though? Because as much as we want it today, do we have the skills? And how long does it take for us to implement those skills? Are we focusing on, skills of the future, investing in education?
Now that's the right question.
I was actually listening to the minister, and the minister said something about how they were going to start refurbishing schools, and how they were going to send procurement spend to black, youth, women, all those. And I asked myself, oh my goodness, do these people have the skills to take on these big contracts? This is where overspending comes in, because you end up spending on companies that are poorly capacitated to provide you with the service. And that's how you end up with poor service delivery, because we didn't go back to the drawing board and capacitate these people to whom we want to give business. That's a problem. That's how we overspend. And once we address the problem of skills, I think then we can start looking towards empowering these companies positively and giving them good government business.
Can I, if I may, sorry, very quickly.
All right.
There's a massive, I feel like there's a big green shoot here that nobody's looking at. In fact, the minister spoke about it, and there's been such a current now in media, and that is sort of flowed against this narrative that nobody's thinking critically about it. Why is it bad to capitalize SAA? Like, we looked at the numbers. So SAA, the Beijing route, right? It cost us R1 billion as South Africa to fund that route. It was R1 billion loss-making route. So everybody goes, SA is costing billions. Yeah, but what they don't tell you is that in that same year when we're still flying the Beijing route, we earned 3.6 billion in foreign incomes that came from Chinese tourists. We canceled the route. Well, guess what? The Chinese tourists ain't coming here anymore because they can go elsewhere. So even on this issue, and we're speaking about small business, you know who gets affected when you cancel the Beijing route? The mom who runs the B&B, right? It's the small guy who runs the tour operating business. So I just feel like we have to be careful where we critique what we're critiquing, and that our criticism is actually based on fact, not on innuendo and stuff we want to believe. There are no lost billions to the SAA story. The SAA story is not a balance sheet issue. It is not a net income issue. It's a net fiscus issue. So you can't evaluate SAA on its ability to generate an income as an operating entity. You have to evaluate SAA on its ability to add value to the fiscus of the country, and that's a measure of other things which are incidental to the value of tourism.
So you're calling it a necessary evil?
Not even a necessary evil. I'm calling it. Well, let's look at Turkey, right? So Turkish Airlines, something like 76 airlines in that country, right? 76 is the size of their fleet. They run a deficit in how they run that airline every year. But guess what? Look at their tourism numbers. Same too you could say for Dubai. Same too you could say for Singapore, right? I just feel like everyone's SAA, it's not bad. We should be doing this.
And we have had a lot of people talking
Because
about from
remember,
economists and ratings agencies. They continue to look at that.
Sure. But if if I was looking at an income statement of most things we do as a country, there are a lot of things I wouldn't be doing. You can't look at it as an income statement and say, well, it's costing us money. You have to also look at it and say, well, what is the net benefit to the fiscus? This is the same conversation we're having now about this funding issue, right? So you can go, well, why are we creating these funds and wanting to help entrepreneurs? It costs the state money. Yeah, but how many jobs do entrepreneurs create? So why do we use the logic there and then we don't use it in other spaces? It just seems to me that there is a disconnect in that logic.
Well, we have to wrap it up. So we haven't really spoken a lot about the youth and whether the youth was represented in this mini budget at all. So I'd just like to get a quick comment from you three, just in terms of the youth and where we're going.
Sure, I mean, let's invest in the youth. Let's invest in the skills. Let's be clear on the world is moving. It's becoming, we're entering or we're currently in the digital era. So how are we digitizing our processes? How are we offering the relevant skills for that? So that didn't necessarily come out quite clearly in the budget speech, but I suppose it's inherent of everything else around us. So invest in education, invest in skills of the future to ensure that, you know, the beneficiaries of our country's progress are people that are well-skilled, globally relevant, very competent individuals.
Yeah, I mean, so you make a valid point. The only thing I'd say in terms of the youth is that I'm deeply worried, right? So, you know, in this country, close on 60% of young people between the ages of 18 and 35 who are Black African are unemployed. Now, what happens when you're at that age and you're unemployed is it means in the next 5 to 10 years you become unemployable. It's a real problem. So you have a schooling system that is not preparing young people for the real world of work as it exists today, an economic environment that can't absorb them into function so they can't develop a skill to provide for themselves in future, an economy that's not growing, which means we can't support them in terms of income grants into the future. We have a big, burgeoning, bubbling problem. And my angst, once again, is that I don't hear deliberate conversations about what are we going to do to fix it. Is there hope? Sure. Walk any of the streets of South Africa and you'll find hope. Drive up Grayston, you find young people cleaning windscreens. Because young people have the energy, right? They will do. And that I suppose is the single biggest failing as a country we have, is that we're forcing young people into the position where they have to do for themselves rather than a position where they are given an environment for which they can create.
Okay, last word.
You know, I was very disappointed hearing the minister almost, you know, sweep over the youth issue. But what he also fails to understand, especially in terms of the youth, is that a lot of young people currently are despondent about the economy. And they feel that the economy isn't going anywhere. And when people are despondent about the economy, they don't strive for anything. We have a growing population of social grant recipients who are aged between 20 and 30. And it's not because they can't work, it's simply because they feel, why should I? Because I'm receiving a social grant. Why aren't we transforming that social grant system into a system that kicks people out after a certain stage? We have dependents who live off social grants, people who go from the age of 20 right up until the age of 60 living off social grants. We can't be a nation that perpetuates that kind of behavior. We can't be a nation that doesn't have a system in place that says you are on welfare, here's your program out of it. That is a program that we need, a program that says you are poor today, you will not be poor tomorrow. You cannot live on this grant. This is not a living grant. This is a passage to your financial freedom. I wish that the minister had gone, or I wish that his team had thought of something to relieve us of the social grant burden, because it's going to become a burgeoning problem. And the bigger the youth population, the more young people are going to require grants because they can't be employed. So I think that moving forward, and in terms of today's budget, let's hope that next year he looks on this budget and he says, how are we implementing? And there's less planning and more we've done or we're doing. I think that's what I'd like to see.
Well, next year we'll have tips for Gigaba. Many thanks to my guest, Matsi Modise. She is the Managing Director of Simodisa. Olebogeng Sentsho, she's the Head of Operations at Yeabo Mining, and Vusi, Thembekwayo, a venture capitalist. That's it from our panel here today. Stay tuned. After the break, we'll give you more analysis on how the market reacted to the budget speech. Don't go away.